There we go. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second Saturday seminar series coming to you from the Animas Museum. I'm Susan Jones. I'm here at the museum, and I'm really happy to have Gaige Sippy with us today to talk about the history of one of the major events that has really put Durango on the map in the cycling world, the Iron Horse Bicycle Classic. Yeah, like the Historical Society, the Iron Horse celebrated its 50th anniversary last year, and we're both of us are now in our 51st year and still going strong. Gaige grew up in Albuquerque and graduated from New Mexico State University. Post-graduation, he worked 8 years at Intel Corporation in Albuquerque, serving as an operations technician and production supervisor. In 1998, he founded Cottonwood Management Service, a property management company in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and soon after that began purchasing investment real estate. In 2002, Gaige and his family moved to Durango. He continues to own Cottonwood Management and has investment real estate holdings in Albuquerque, Farmington, Aztec, Silver City, New Mexico. Gaige was the director of the Iron Horse Bicycle Classic from 2006 to 2023, and that is coming up in 2 weeks. Gaige currently works with the Durango Mesa Park Foundation, facilitating the construction of community recreational and cultural facilities on the Mesa site. And he was recently chosen as Durango's Citizen of the Year by the Chamber of Commerce at the Durango Rocks celebration. So before we jump into this, as usual, some quick Zoom housekeeping. We're using Zoom webinars feature, which means that you're all muted and your videos are all off. At the bottom of your screen, and you may need to mouse down a little bit to see it, there are a couple icons. So to minimize distractions today, we've disabled the chat function. However, if you have an immediate issue or question, please click on the Q&A icon and we'll be monitoring that. But we ask that you ask all your questions or save all your questions for the end of the talk. At the end, we'll open it up for questions, and you can either type them in and we'll get them answered for you, or you can click the little hand icon to raise your hand and we'll allow you to unmute and ask your question live. This session is being recorded, and you will receive an email in 24 hours with a link to the recording and any other resources that we talk about today in the webinar. And with that, let me turn it over to Gaige.
Thank you, Susan, for the introduction. Thanks everyone that is out there for taking part in this. I was here, I think, exactly 1 year ago with Ned over and doing something similar. And we were on the eve of the 50th anniversary of the Iron Horse. So it's fun to come back now, and I can talk a little bit about the 50th, but it's fun to have done that, and it's fun to have it in the rearview mirror as well, as you might imagine. And so I'm going to take you through a few things today. So when I did this last year, as I mentioned, I had Ned over and with me, Ned is probably the most prolific athlete at the Iron Horse Bicycle Classic in its history. And we talked about various stories from the Iron Horse through the years. And so what I'm going to talk about today is we're going to go into kind of by decade some of the more interesting points that have taken place throughout the course of the event. And so I'm going to move to the next slide, which is, and so some of the information that I'm drawing, so just so you don't think I'm pulling this stuff out of midair, we have plenty of history, not only in our minds, but documented with regards to the event. What I'm holding up here, and you might not be able to see that, but last year we had John Peel do another anniversary book that encompassed the 50 years of the event. And so we did one at the 40th, we did one at the 35th anniversary, and again, we just did one at the 50th. So I was telling Susan before this started, when we completed this book last year was right around the time of the event. And I was so tired when the event was over. I hate to say this to John Peel, but I didn't even pick the book up until recently when Susan reached out to me about doing this. So, but it was great to go back and revisit. So last year was my last year. Last year was my final year of being the director of the Iron Horse. I did it for 16 years. The event directorship has been turned over to Ian Burnett. Ian grew up here and is he also helps run the cycling program, but I remember seeing Ian as a kid riding the Iron Horse. So it's fun to have a local young man helping lead the charge for the event going into this year. And so I am the kind of de facto historian for the event at this point. And since our founder, Ed Zink, passed away back in 2019, I have tried to do my best to capture what I learned from Ed, get it into paper, and hopefully can be a spokesperson for the event for events such as this. So, okay, with that said, let's start talking about the event. So I think everybody kind of knows that the event kicked off back in the 70s based on the Mayer brothers candy bar challenge to Silverton. So Jim Mayer worked for the train. Tom was a avid cyclist and tinkerer. The Mayer family lived out in Hermosa. If you think of Honeyville, that would be the Mayer family back in those days. And so Tom challenged Jim that he could ride his bicycle to Silverton and beat the train. And so, as they say, the rest is history. Tom indeed rode his bike to Silverton. And when Jim arrived on the train, Tom was already there. Jim accused him of throwing a bike in the back of a truck and getting there faster than he could have otherwise pedaling, but that was not the case. Tom was just stronger. And I tell folks this that are dejected sometimes when they don't beat the train to Silverton. The train has an easier route to Silverton than the bicycles do. And so the train doesn't have to go over Coalbank Pass. The train does not have to go over Molas Pass. They follow the river bottom by and large, which the elevation doesn't get the same. So the cyclists have a tougher trip. So with that said, the Mayer brothers had this idea that they were going to race each other to Silverton. But what turned from that is Tom Mayer kind of thought this was a good idea and they should get more people doing it. And so what he needed to kind of help that along was an idea of, if it was going to become an event, how could that be? And so a local businessman named Ed Zink, whose family owned a sporting goods store in downtown Durango on Main Street, the Mayer brothers, who were neighbors of the Zink family, who also live out in the Animas Valley, they got to discussing this with Ed and mentioned to him what it was and what they'd done. And Ed, being entrepreneurial in nature, kind of grasped the idea and said, hey, this might be a fun way to get something started, get an activity going on in Durango, so on and so forth. And so at the same time, so 1971, the mayors challenged each other to make this ride. At the same time, a cycling event called the Tour de Valley was taking place, and that was put together by a local school teacher who wanted to get some sort of cycling event going on. There's some history around this, but she held what was called the Tour de Valley out in the Hermosa Valley in 1971 in the spring. So it was kind of it preempted the Iron Horse as a cycling event, road bikes riding around or in the Animas Valley. So fast forward to 1972, and the Zink and the Mayer brothers have decided maybe we should try this Iron Horse thing. And Tom Mayer had a lot of connections through different things he'd done in life, and they brought together 36 riders to ride, not all the way to Silverton. So there was abbreviated levels of Iron Horse, and it took till 1975 before they went up and over the hill and into Silverton. So the brothers come up with the idea. There's already this little Tour de Valley thing going on, which is attracting some strong bike riders that also happen to be skiers that lived here or were going to college here and things of that nature. So there's some of this cycling activity starting to take shape at that time, and higher level athletes that were here for ski training, much influenced by Dolph Koos of the Koos family here in Durango. Another thing that was going on at that time, and this is not well known at all, is that there was another family in the Animas Valley, the Feller family. And they lived, if you were in the Animas Valley, there's the Zinc Ranch, then there's the Feller Ranch, and then there was the Mayer location, and they were stair-stepped up the valley. Well, the Feller brothers had become much like Tom Mayer. They were tinkerers and loved to ride bicycles. And one of the Feller brothers kind of developed the first mountain bike. I'm not saying first in the United States, but probably certainly first in this area. And that would have been in the late 60s, early 70s. And it was common knowledge that he was riding that on Hermosa Creek Trail in the late 60s. So Crested Butte has quite a history of mountain biking, and Marin County, California has a big history of mountain biking. I think it's worth the argument that we would say that in the late 60s, early 70s, Durango was already started down the mountain biking path. We probably just didn't know what it was called at that point. For those of you that are interested in more about the Feller brothers or any of this, I would encourage you in the next few weeks to head up to the community concert hall at Fort Lewis College. Our 50th anniversary Iron Horse display is still up, and it's going to be taken down in June. It's been up for a year, but that original mountain bike from the Feller brothers is up there right now with the story that goes along with it. So all of the stuff up there is great and a lot of history, and it's great to go look at it because it gives you the ability to see some of this stuff kind of up close and personal. But so late 60s, early 70s, got bike tinkerers, getting out, riding their bikes. And we all have seen the Durango Wheel Club photo from Baker's Bridge in the late 1800s. So cycling is part of the DNA to some extent, but it kind of took this crazy idea from the Mayer brothers and Ed Zink for it to take root and get moving. And so, as stated, in 1972, 36 riders do an abbreviated version of the Iron Horse compared to what we do now. And that kind of grew a little bit of legs. And so, as Ed Zink would tell you, those 36 people were made up of anyone they could invite to show up to the start line and put their foot in the pedal so it looked like someone was there. Compare that now to a weekend of, anywhere from 3,500 to 4,000 total riders for the weekend. It seems a stretch back in 1972 that 51 years later, we would still be doing this. So those first years were somewhat dominated by skiers. So Mike Elliott, who is an Olympian skier from Durango, a cross-country skier, he was our original winner. Mary Lee Atkinson was an original winner. She was a skier. John Timbers, in those early years from a professional standpoint, he was a skier. And so the skiing community kind of made up the professional level, if you would, of competition in those early years. We're talking about an event that had 30 to, or 36 to 100, 150 riders in the first few years. So fairly small. But the other piece that was important, and part of the reason it took shape, was, believe it or not, back in 1972, Durango wasn't a bustling community on a holiday weekend. So there weren't a ton of people coming to Durango on Memorial Day weekend just to be in Durango on Memorial weekend. So it tended to be the first weekend the train would go all the way to Silverton. And so Memorial Day was chosen for a lot of those factors. It was a long weekend. It was the first weekend of the train going all the way to Silverton. And it was also the idea that maybe we can fill a few hotel rooms, bring people to town, eat at our restaurants, so on and so forth. That was very much a foundational piece of the origins of the event. Yes, it was to get people out on their bikes. And yet, there was a lot of different things that were great in that piece, but by no means was that the only reason. It was very much the spirit of it was to start it to bring some business to not only Durango, but in not too many years later to Silverton as well. So in those early years, it was a bit of engaging the rest of the community to start helping build this weekend, right? So you needed chambers of commerce, you needed law enforcement, you needed all the things that it takes to run a special event. It's a challenging piece of highway to go up and over on a bicycle, but it's also a challenging piece of highway when you have inclement weather and when you have, very challenging spring weather. Maybe looking back on it, It might have been easier if they'd have chosen Labor Day weekend from a weather standpoint, but it was Memorial Day weekend, and snowstorms absolutely happen on Memorial Day weekend. But nonetheless, they had the foundation in the 70s to get this thing started. And in the first few years, as I mentioned, start out with 36 riders. And as you grow into the later part of the 70s, the event becomes more recognized because of the quality of skiers that are participating, starts to get the attention of some of the quality cyclists that are in and around the region, the state, that want to go down and challenge the skiers to some extent and see if they can up them in their abilities and speed and so on and so forth. A point of note, the women's race the first year only went through the valley, and it did not climb any of the hills, because thinking back then was the women might not be able to climb any of the hills. Those weren't my rules. Those were just the early 70s. And so anyways, that is an interesting factoid that folks don't realize. It took many, many years before the women made their way all the way to Silverton as well. And so, oh, how times have changed. But nonetheless, the 70s from 72 to 79 timeframe was very much getting the event going. They had not only the rides north to Silverton area, but they also would do events that went south of town, east of town towards Vallecito. They did criteriums up on the college. So they did various things to try to make it a weekend of cycling, not just one day of cycling. And they had the ability to start bringing more and more people to Durango, not just professional riders, but they started working on bringing more amateur level riders as well, because there's simply not enough professional cyclists to make it a large weekend from a tourism standpoint. So you needed to start engaging the rest of the cycling community at large to get some more numbers coming to town. But at that time, they were able to get the event up. It was very much a volunteer-driven event. And it was all hands on deck, obviously, for the entire Zink family, because that's what they did. They helped facilitate it, and a host of many other community folks, not only providing, assistance from a labor standpoint and helping put the event on over the weekend, but also from sponsorship money and things of that nature to help kick the event off and keep the costs down so they could continue to attract people. But by the time the 70s were wrapping up, the event had taken hold as somewhat of a premier event in the Southwest and in this region. So they had kind of done their work, and they had gotten themselves to a point where it was becoming popular enough that they figured they were onto something. And so as the 70s wrapped up and we moved into the 80s, that is actually when the name became the Iron Horse Bicycle Classic. Before that, it was the Iron Horse Challenge. It had several names in the early years, but always trying to capture the train as being part of it. And so when it got to the 1980s is when it actually took on the name Iron Horse Bicycle Classic. So as we enter into the 1980s, a couple of things are going on in the cycling world, and that is that there's a young man named Alexei Graywall, who was an up-and-coming bicycle racer. And he was, 19 years old, somewhere in that time frame. He lived up in Front Range area of Colorado. He comes down and rides the event. Additionally, we're starting to see more notable riders on a national level coming here to test themselves against the skiers I mentioned. And so we start seeing bigger names start entering in the 80s. And that Alexei Graywall does go on to win the 1984 Olympics. And so once, he had participated here, he then goes on to win the Olympics. That kind of sets the stage for even more elite level athletes, both male and female, wanting to come ride the event. At the same time, the event makes a big push to start running the event, a duplicate event that takes the same path, called the Citizens Tour. And so Citizens Tour isn't necessarily bike racers. These are folks that are weekend warriors and everyday riders that wanted to get out and ride the route, race the train, if you will, to Silverton. So that really kicks off the growth of the event from an overall participation. So as I mentioned earlier, there's only so many elite level bike racers in the world. And there's certainly only so many in this region and in the United States. So pinning your hopes that you're going to have this large scale event, and that's true to this day on the professional level athlete, really means you're only ever going to have an event that's 150 to 200 riders. But if you start bringing in amateur riders and citizen riders, you can really see some tremendous growth in the event. And so that becomes somewhat of the focus in the 80s, is we're going to have the Citizens Tour. We're going to expand our offerings to amateur riders, and we are going to refine our process of getting from Durango to Silverton, because that is the marquee event. While we are doing the event is doing other things like riding to Mesa Verde or riding south to Ignacio and things of that is ancillary events throughout the weekend. As is now, as was then, the signature event is making your way up and over the hill to Silverton. Another thing that happened in the 80s that probably really propelled the event and its notoriety was Ned Overend moves to Durango in the mid 83, I think was perhaps his first Iron Horse. But Ned becomes certainly synonymous with the legendary status of the event and things of that nature. But Ned moves to town as a rock climber and a runner. And somewhere along the way, someone introduces him to a bicycle. He works at the Outdoorsman. Back in that day, now that is Mountain Bike Specialist, but the Outdoorsman was the sporting goods store that the Zink family owned. Ned grabs a road bike, signs up as an amateur in his first year of riding it. He essentially, and another gentleman named Todd Gagulski, darn near beat the entire pro field, and they started behind him. And so Ned becomes a great spokesperson for the event, but he also becomes the local person that goes on the cycling stage for the country and the world that really starts drawing a lot of notoriety about bicycle racers to Durango. It kind of starts that culture of larger scale bike racing being part of the fabric of the community. So you've got an event now. Ned does it. He does very well. He realizes he has an aptitude for cycling, and he goes on to race the Road World Championships and becomes part of Team USA in this mid 1980s period. And he lives in Durango. And so he becomes a very prolific figure in cycling. So guess what happens? Other elite athletes want to come here and compete against Ned Overend because he's extremely successful. And so that kind of changes the program as well. And it starts bringing, again, additional focus from not only professional riders, but amateur riders who view Ned Overend as somewhat of a cycling notable. So that is a very important piece to our community and the growth of the Iron Horse is Ned enters the picture. And while we've had many great local athletes that have participated in the event and helped get it started and have been ambassadors for it, I can personally tell you he is the most sought after every year at the Iron Horse from fandom and people being interested in the sport. So it was fortuitous that he landed in Durango and picked up a bicycle. It was fortuitous for him. It's fortuitous for the event. And it has certainly helped us create that culture. So again, we're in the 80s. We have some bigger name riders coming to take part in the event. It becomes an Olympic qualifier event for road racing. We have established that we need to get more amateurs and citizens riders out there and make them part of it. And the financial impact of all of that, more people, more activity, is really meeting the expectation and the goals of the event when it started in the early 70s, which was bring people to town on Memorial Day weekend, help kick off summer, and help raise some revenue for our community. Again, I think it's easy for all of us that see Durango today to think something along the lines of, holy smokes, we may not need any more people here. It's too busy as it is. Anyone back then will tell you that was not the case. And so bringing people here to get things going was a positive, and it remains a very strong economic driver to this day for Memorial Day weekend. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So we're up and running. And the other thing that starts to happen with the Iron Horse about this time is all-terrain bikes, soon to be known as mountain bikes, start entering the frame. And so Crested Butte has a mountain bike thing going on. Marin County has a mountain bike thing going on. They're starting to pop up in other parts of the region. And so mountain bike racing all at once is a thing. And so the Iron Horse grabs the opportunity to do that here. And it kicks off in the 84 timeframe at the Iron Horse as a specific event, along with criteriums, along with road racing, tours, all that type of thing. Mountain bike racing enters the frame. And again, probably didn't know, a little like Ned Overend at the time, we probably didn't know as an event or as a community how this all-terrain bike or / mountain bike thing was going to have an impact on Durango and cycling in general. But that started in the early 80s. And I think a lot of folks think about mountain bike racing, maybe late 80s, early 90s, but really it started back in the 80s, and it was an Iron Horse event starting in 1984. Other things that were going on in that time to kind of make it a broad base of events for the weekend is the narrow gauge run started in the 1980s. It is still up and running to this day. And so the narrow gauge run, I believe it's 10K, and so it takes place on Iron Horse weekend. And it also has a component where you can do the cycling piece, and they piece those two together, kind of like a duathlon or a triathlon. We've had swimming events as well as part of it. So again, what are we trying to do, or what's the event trying to do back then? Bring people to town, get them here, attract a different audience to come participate in the event, meaning not just elite level athletes. And then it's starting to attract other folks to come via running. Maybe it's a swimming event, but making it a full weekend. The tremendous advantage Durango has at that time is that, and at this time as well, is that people start bringing their family members along to the event. So cyclists are bringing their family along because there's other things to do while they're here. You can hike, you can raft, you can do these other things. So it being on Memorial Day weekend, and Memorial Day weekend being a long weekend, it allows for families to come and take part, not just in the bike riding, but other things that are going on. That remains a strength of the event as well. And so if you kind of look at the decade of the 80s, bigger names, Ned Overend enters the picture, mountain biking becomes a thing. The event kind of takes root. It celebrates 10-year anniversary, in the early 80s, and the community starts to believe, is at this point believing in it. A lot of support from law enforcement, local governments, Silverton, things of that nature. And so it really has its roots in it, and it's up and going. The other thing that happens in the later 80s is as mountain biking continues to grow, Durango becomes the site of some of the early national championship events for mountain bike racing as a whole for the United States. Back then, it was called the National Off-Road Bicycling Association, and the Iron Horse became a stop in that tour, if you will, and several of those events were national championship caliber events. Many of them were held out at Edgemont Ranch, for those of you that didn't know that. So mountain bike racing in the early years of the Iron Horse was in Log Chutes area on Junction Creek. It was at Edgemont Ranch. And so now you think of Edgemont Ranch, quite a few houses and probably maybe not space for it. I happened to race the 1989 Iron Horse mountain bike race the last year it was at Edgemont Ranch. And so, there were different venues for it back at that time. But once again, mountain bike riding is taking off, racing is taking off. And the other thing here in Durango proper is the local cycling culture is continuing to grow, not just on road bikes, but now this mountain bike thing has entered the frame. Ned Overend has become a mountain bike racer. We've got prolific riders such as John Tomac, Julie Furtado, Ruthie Mathis, other top-level athletes on not only the national stage, but the world stage are hanging around Durango more. They're doing training here in Durango, and they're doing training camps here in Durango. So the mountain bike, the fast-growing mountain bike community is really looking at Durango as kind of the racing hub, if you will, and where a lot of riders are going to train. And then subsequently, as we move into the 90s, a lot of them move to Durango, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. But once again, the 80s was certainly a transition period from the standpoint of it went being a pretty homegrown event in the 70s, getting this thing up and going. A lot of skiers are the face of the event. It's all hands on deck to get it going and prove to the community it's worth having. And then as we transition into the 80s, all of those great skiers have made the bicycle racers proper want to come compete against them. And so our level of competition goes up. A few of those riders that are here go on to do big things at the Olympic level, Tour de France level, so on and so forth. So it kind of becomes a proving ground. The Iron Horse does. It's an Olympic qualifier. And, we introduce citizens riders to the event. All at once, mountain bikes come along. We grasp onto or latch onto that pretty quickly. And we continue to build the foundation of having a full weekend of events that there aren't just for cyclists, but your family members can come along and take part and go do other things that the community provides. And the realization of, yes, this thing really does help our local economy, not just for the city of Durango, but for the town of Silverton and so on and so forth. And the key ingredients are there. You have a train, you have a beautiful mountain highway that leads you to a mining town. So some of those essential ingredients that you couldn't have necessarily scripted are there and available. So the 80s wraps up with mountain biking growing in a hurry. And the overall size of the event continuing to get bigger and more well-known on the national stage. Okay, the 1990s. So certainly probably one of the biggest things that happened with cycling in Durango came in 1990. And so as mountain biking on a national level and an international level explodes in the late 80s and into the 90s. And so there had been some unofficial world championships in the later 80s that were not necessarily ran by the unifying body of cycling and so on and so forth. And so there was a proposition from the UCI, which is the worldwide sanctioning body for cycling, that they wanted to hold the first ever unified World Mountain Bike Championships in 1990. And so the Iron Horse organization and a host of other local folks decided that, maybe we should throw our hat in the ring and see if we could be part of that. And it's one thing to have a national level event. It's another to have an international level event. And it's another thing to having really the first ever international event in this particular discipline. So Ed Zink and a host of others and the Iron Horse Committee and lots of local business people and local city government folks made their pitch to the UCI to put on this 1990 World Championships of mountain biking. And the fact that the Iron Horse had hosted all of these national championship level mountain bike races prior, and that the Iron Horse organization had been up and running for many years and had understood what it was doing. Durango was a supportive community. They made the pitch and weren't sure if they were going to get it done or not. And then all at once they got the letter in the mail back in those days that said, you have been selected. So if you talk to Ed Zink or any of the folks that were part of that, they were excited and terrified all in the same breath. And so it's one thing to go out and pitch why you think you can do it and having those things in place to do it, but it's another to go execute on that. And so as we enter into the 1990s, the first thing out of the gate is the Durango's going to host the first ever unified mountain bike world championships. And so that year at the Iron Horse, 1990, they used Purgatory. Purgatory was the site of the 1990 World Championships. So for Iron Horse weekend, the World Championships were in September of 1990. So the Iron Horse obviously is in May of 1990. So they were prepping for the World Championships, and that year the Iron Horse held the mountain bike race. So in 1989 it was at Edgemont. In 1990 it moves up to Purgatory, and it's going to be on the World's course. So they've identified what the World Championship course is going to be, and so they figured, let's do a test run with the Iron Horse, and they did. I happened to participate in that, and they had to shovel snow off the course on the top part of the ski area. Be a little like this year, perhaps. Maybe this year's a little deeper, but nonetheless, they shoveled out the course on the top portions of Purgatory. The World's course was built kind of in the fall and then into that spring, and they raced at Purgatory to kind of practice for this. But the community believes it can run a successful World Championship in Durango. And they did. And so in the fall of 1990, September of 1990, the world descends on Durango. Mountain biking is booming. And lo and behold, Ned Overend wins the world championships in front of the home crowd. And it starts off a series of events from a cycling and mountain biking standpoint in Durango that probably no one guessed was going to happen. So once the world championship level event was over, it was televised. It had, all of the things that you would hope for. It really put Durango on the map. And so in the summer following and the years following, the cycling industry kind of moved its way to Durango. And so bicycle companies were moving here, professional riders were moving here. And so people wanted to be part of whatever was going on in Durango at that time for cycling. Now, mountain biking is starting to steal the show, if you can gather that. And so road racing still popular, but still very much European on a global scale, whereas mountain biking is almost invented in the United States. So it's a little like NFL football. Us Americans are prideful of things that we think we've invented. And so therefore, mountain biking really takes shape and grows quickly because it seems more accessible than road biking. You're not on the roads. There's a lot of different aspects to it that make it so it grows quickly, not just from a racing standpoint, from just people going out and riding mountain bikes. And so there's every bike company that's currently building road bikes moves as fast as they can into building mountain bikes. And you start to see a real growth in mountain biking that starts to dwarf road racing, not only on a national level, but on an international level. So it becomes very popular. Durango is fortunate at that time, we had a reasonable amount of mountain biking terrain, meaning we had single track. Think of Hermosa Creek, think of Junction Creek, think of Animas Mountain. We didn't have near the trail system back then that we do now, but we did have trails, and it was mountainous. So it fit the bill that it was a great mountain bike location. Yes, Crested Butte had stuff going on, Aspen Vale, all the mountain states had activity around that, California, but Durango became the hub for that. And once again, we started seeing lots of people coming to this community. The other piece of it is mountain biking becomes viewed as a popular sport to be televised cycling sport. And so some made for TV cycling events start to take place. Durango had one of those in the 92-93 period for ESPN. It was made for TV mountain bike racing that took place on Iron Horse weekend. It was called the Roostmaster. And so mountain biking has really become popular. What continues to make the Iron Horse popular at this time, in addition to our mountain bike scene growing quickly, is we're continuing to do this road race. And a lot of those elite level mountain bikers, they may not do many road races, but they're going to do the Iron Horse because it's all on the same weekend. And so now we kind of take yourself back to when the skiers were extremely prolific at the event, and it was attracting elite road racers to come here and compete against the top level Olympic skiers. Now we get the same thing going on where a lot of these top end mountain bike racers are showing up, and they're doing not only the mountain bike race, but the road race. So it starts attracting high level road racers that want to, again, come to Durango and compete against the top level mountain bikers, and vice versa. So it really helps the Iron Horse that we're a multidisciplined event at that time. So when mountain biking got popular, we didn't abandon the road race to Silverton, because at the end of the day, that is the bread and butter of the event over the last 5 decades. But we certainly wanted to embrace the mountain bike piece. And in the early 90s, one might have thought that, hey, is this road racing thing going to last at the Iron Horse? And is this mountain biking thing going to take over entirely? The organization did a good job of managing both at that time, and continued to do so in the years ahead, because cycling ebbs and flows. If you've been around it long enough, you will know that what's in fashion today in cycling 5 years from now may not be. So the Iron Horse had the foresight to, yes, we'll keep our bread and butter events going, but we will adopt this new mountain bike thing. And it really took Durango to an entirely new level from a notoriety for cycling in general across not only the United States, but the globe. And so everyone wanted to be part of that Durango mountain bike scene. And it really manifested itself on a local basis too. More bike shops crop up. Lots of mountain bikes are being sold. Cycling tourism becomes more of a thing here. You know, not every community had trails back then. And so if you bought a mountain bike where you lived outside of Durango, may have had one or two actual single track trails, but they didn't have much. Coming to Durango, you could do Hermosa Creek, you could ride Kennebec Pass, you could do all these different things. So that, you know, that really propelled that as well. Additionally, at the 1990 Mountain Bike World Championships, there was a land symposium that got all of the national land managers together. And the conversation there was, hey, how are we going to manage these mountain bikes that are all at once on public land? And out of that, locally came Trails 2000, currently known as Durango Trails. But out of that, the local community decided that if this mountain biking thing is going to take off, we need to really figure out how we're going to manage our trail system, expand our trail system, so on and so forth. So that 90 Worlds was a watershed moment in our community on many, many levels. And the Iron Horse was part of helping run that and facilitate that, but it also strengthened the Iron Horse for future years with this whole mountain bike crazy scene we had going on, coupling that with the road racing action that we had going on for many, many years. So all at once, we have both disciplines taking place on that weekend, along with a running and along with you know, again, we do swimming events and so on and so forth. So the event had a strong hold on that weekend. The other thing that happened in the 1990s that was pretty challenging to the event for its, you know, safety standpoint is we had a couple years in the mid 90s of some really big snowstorms on the passes during the event. And so I think it was 94 or 95. Riders are about, you know, everyone takes off in the Durango area and heads towards Silverton. And, you know, there's a varying degree of time that it takes riders to get up and over the hill into Silverton. So the fastest professional level riders are leaving Durango and they arrive in Silverton in, you know, 2 hours and 15 minutes, 2.5 hours. Then you have the more citizen rider who maybe is not that fit and they take off at 8 a.m. in the morning and they don't get there till 1 in the afternoon. So you can see the difference in the amount of time that we're exposed on the road. Well, a not so freak storm blew into the passes in the mid 90s on the first big snow incident, and it trapped hundreds of riders up on Molas Pass and Coalbank. We have some outstanding photos of what I will call a group hug of about 400 people on top of Molas Pass, huddled together trying to stay warm because it snowed about 6 inches in an hour and a half. And everyone got off their bikes and didn't know what to do, and the roads were icy, and they were trying to dispatch snow plows and school buses out of Silverton. And to say the least, it was a very challenging emergency for the community to manage getting these people off the hill. And, you know, believe it or not, there had been storms in the past, but nothing to this level. Therefore, some of the policies and procedures that are in place now weren't in place back then, because perhaps it just had never happened and they didn't, you know, hadn't planned for it. And so that was a pretty watershed, no pun intended, moment for the event around, we're going to have to think about how we're managing this from an emergency standpoint, not meaning people are crashing and getting hurt, but meaning the elements can change this thing so fast. And at this point, the event's starting to have 1,000, 1,500 people riding to Silverton. So it's not like back in the days when it was 200 or 300, and you could have gotten those people kind of corralled up pretty easy, and they were all riding it in a similar time frame. Now you've got this large group of people over a large piece of real estate with a varying degree of abilities, taking, you know, a lot of different time in between. And it really posed some challenges from that standpoint when an emergency would break out. So a lot of things have taken place since then to manage that. But the great snowstorm of that particular midnight. There was 2 of them in a row. So the next year, the race got started and the tour got started, and they had to shut it down at the bottom of Coal Bank because of another snowstorm. So pretty much 2 years in a row, they had major weather. And so that kind of was a changing moment for the event. And what was learned in the second time this happened, when none of the riders made it to Silverton, was the economic impact to Silverton of not having the Iron Horse arrive there. And so, from a Silverton standpoint, Silverton has 300 or 400 year-round residents. And then on any given weekend, that grows to some extent. But when the a modern Iron Horse shows up there with approximately 2,000 to 2,500 participants, whose family members or friends tend to join in as well, then you have spectators. So all at once, Silverton goes from a kind of quiet town on a Saturday morning of 500 residents to 7,000 or 8,000 people there for a few hours, and then we all leave. Now, yes, the train comes and goes every day, but that's on a pretty scheduled time frame. They arrive, they get off the train, they have lunch, they get on a bus, they go home. The cyclists kind of arrive en masse, and so it really expands the size of a town for a period of time. It also expands their sales tax revenue and the revenues at the businesses. And so for the event back in that second year of the big snow in the 90s, it absolutely brought to the fore what an economic engine it was for the town of Silverton on Memorial Day weekend. And there were some hard feelings that the event didn't make it over the hill and arrive in Silverton, because, as you can imagine, restaurants buy extra food. People plan for a lot of people to come there and do things. And when all at once none of them show up and you have zero warning until an hour before it happens, it really can be hard on their economy. So there was some learnings that came out of those first couple of weather events. The emergency issue and the economics became very, very clear. Additionally, things that took place in the 90s. So you just heard me say that the event has grown from 36 in 1972 to now all at once we have 1,000 to 1,500 riders going over the hill. All of this time up until the mid 90s, the highway has been open to traffic. So think about driving today from Durango to Silverton. There's a lot of cars. Now, there weren't maybe as many cars back then because the area wasn't as populated, or perhaps tourism wasn't as strong then, but there's still cars on the road. And so having 1,000 to 1,500 bicycle riders mixed in with the cars was exciting. And so I participated in some of those years where the cars were on the road. And when you start down the backside of Coal Bank Pass, and there's not much on the right-hand side of you to lean into if you have to miss a corner or get run off the road, or you come up, you're going down Coal Bank Pass at 50 miles an hour, and the person in the car in front of you is pretty tentative, and they're driving 25, and you're competitive and you want to get around them. So you weave around cars and you're weaving through cars, and there's oncoming cars. Where this is going. So it starts to become a question mark in everybody's minds, from the participants to law enforcement to the communities around, is this safe? And what are we going to, if it's not safe, what might we do about it? An interesting factoid that a lot of folks are unaware of with the Iron Horse, that oftentimes I'm asked, what is the fastest time a rider has ever ridden to Silverton? And there's been a couple, there's a couple of under 2-hour Iron Horse times. Please keep in mind that the Iron Horse road race, not the Citizens Tour, but the road race event for many years started at right at the edge of town at the end of Animas View Drive. There's a hotel out there, and it's escaping my mind of what it used to be called back when we used to start out there. Now it's an apartment building. But just think, when you enter the valley on your right-hand side, it's now an apartment facility. That used to be the starting line for the professional race. And there were folks that did sub 2-hour rides. One particular year in the early 90s, when the road was still open to cars, one young man who went sub 2 hours, I think it was an hour 56 or an hour 57. He was a world-class level athlete. He rolls into Silverton and he throws his hands up, and he's not only won, but he's set an incredible time. And while he is wiping the sweat off his brow and shaking hands, the sheriff pulls up and notifies himself and the race director, Ed Zink, and the others that this young man is being disqualified for crossing the double yellow line going into Silverton, going around cars. Well, that really brings a lot more of this to the fore, right? Around, okay, this event's popular, it's good for our economy. We're drawing in riders from all over the country, and now you're starting to draw in international riders because, again, mountain biking has joined the frame, and Durango's viewed as, I want to come to Durango and race against the likes of Ruthie Mathis and John Tomac and Julie Furtado, who all are living in Durango at this point. And so therefore, it becomes a harder decision on what you're going to do about closing this road and managing it. So right along mid-1990s time frame, event has grown. We've had some safety issues, both weather and other. The question becomes, really, the gauntlet gets dropped, or the gavel gets dropped, and a sheriff says, I feel like either you cancel the event, period, or you close the road. Well, obviously that wasn't the best news for the Iron Horse organization. So they had to go on a fairly significant campaign to understand what would it take to close the road, and then get the community to support that, so on and so forth. And so that took place over kind of the course of that following year. And really how that all played out was it was kind of put to an informal vote between the different communities. So Durango, Silverton, and Ouray, because Ouray is impacted by the highway being closed, right? Silverton is obviously impacted by the highway being closed. And to some extent, Durango is too, because if you're passing through Durango wanting to go north and you can't, you may not come through Durango. You may go around, or you may do some other version of this. Same for Silverton, same for Ouray. So it was a big decision. It was, like I said, kind of put to a vote amongst the municipalities all along the way, and law enforcement that represented those municipalities. And it was actually Ouray that was the deciding vote, and they voted for it to happen. And so therefore, the event closed the road. I think the first year of the closure was 96 or 97. And it was a game changer because the safety factor went up, but it also was one of the few US highways in the United States that gets closed for a special event. But if you're a bike rider, getting to ride that terrain on a closed highway without cars whipping around you and how quiet it is, it was a game changer. And so that was very much a watershed moment. We could not run the event in today's environment if that road was not closed. So that took place in the mid-1990s as well. So as all of these things going on, the event continues to grow. Other events start to show up to, again, make this a more encompassing weekend. So we have kind of the formalization of starting a kids race, a little kids race. The first year I was just reading in the history book, there was 50 kids that took place in this little small event we would do at some part of town to let kids ride their bike with a number plate on it. That now is about 400 kids on every given weekend, any Iron Horse weekend. We had law enforcement categories. And then the other thing that started taking place was collegiate cycling was a thing, but FLC starts their collegiate cycling program. And Durango becomes home kind of Iron Horse becomes a collegiate cycling national championship in the late 90s because it was supposed to go to, I think it was Albuquerque or a community like that, and they had to cancel last minute, and Durango said, well, we can do it. We'll just do it on Iron Horse weekend. And at the same time, the FLC cycling program was starting. That in itself is a great story. FLC cycling has, I think, won more national championships than any other cycling program in the United States. It remains a cycling powerhouse. And it attracts 160 kids each year that take part in that team, coming from all over the United States. And so, Iron Horse is available, was an early sponsor of the FLC program, was able to host one of a collegiate national championship here kind of on a last minute notice, but it helps give more traction to bringing this cycling culture, continuing to formalize. So you have all the professional riders here. You have just a lot of rank and file citizen riders here. We've developed some cycling tourism of people wanting to come here. And now you start adding in things like a collegiate program that's taking place. It really starts to boost, again, more of that entertainment and excitement around cycling. The other thing that's going on at this very same time is that mountain biking becomes an Olympic sport in 1996. And a young man that was born and raised here in Durango, Nordic skier Travis Brown, participates. So Travis grew up in Durango. He becomes a mountain biker while he's in college. He one of his first big races was the 1990 World Championships. He was a total unknown at that event and ended up getting 10th place. His career took off from there. So Travis is a representative at the first mountain bike event at the Olympics in 1996 in Atlanta. Ed Zink is asked to be a technical director for the 1996 Olympics mountain bike component. And ever since mountain biking has been an Olympic sport since 96, there has been at least one rider from Durango on that team since it began in 96. So again, Durango, cycling powerhouse. We have a lot of racers here, a very enthusiastic community. The event is growing. We have some growing pains, but we're getting our hands around it. But we continue to make this somewhat of a marquee event regionally, nationally, and internally or here in the community, the cycling culture continues to grow. So the 1990s was a big era for Durango cycling, not just on the road, not just on the dirt, but just kind of overall. People moving here because they like the cycling culture, so on and so forth, that aren't professional level athletes because they like the outdoor recreation component. So the 90s was a very influential time, not just for the Iron Horse, but just in our community for cycling in general. Okay, so as the 90s are wrapping up and mountain biking is really, really big in the early part of the 90s, believe it or not, it starts to change a little bit in the late 90s. And as we move into Y2K, road biking starts to become popular again. And that's all because a Texan starts winning the Tour de France. And Lance Armstrong becomes very popular because of his story. So, cancer survivor, goes on to win the Tour de France, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, there's a bad ending to that for those of you that are familiar with cycling. But the popularity of road biking explodes. So it is safe to say that in the 90s, mountain biking was early 90s and mid 90s for sure. Mountain biking was dwarfing road cycling in general, from a weekend warrior standpoint all the way to the elite level. Mountain biking was where it was at in the United States. As we transitioned into the late 90s and into the 2000s, all at once, Lance Armstrong becomes popular. And additionally, cycling kind of becomes the new golf for folks that are maybe a little bit older. And so therefore, you start seeing a resurgence of road biking. And not just racers, but just, citizen riders. And guess what? We have a great event for them. You can come race a train on a closed road across 2 mountain passes, finishing in a historic mining town. And we start seeing tremendous growth in the Citizens Tour during this period in the early 2000s. And what we're also seeing, so we're seeing a lot of growth in the rides to Silverton, but on the flip side, the mountain bike events on Iron Horse Weekend are falling off significantly. And so we started adjusting and starting planning for that. And by 2006, believe it or not, mountain biking wasn't even an offering at the Iron Horse. We were down to where we were only able to attract maybe 100 to 125 riders. On the flip side, the Iron Horse Road Race and Citizens Tour have gotten so big, we're starting to get concerned about how big should this thing get. And so in the 2005, 2006 timeframe, we start having the discussions with the communities involved in law enforcement, and we decide that a safe number is 2,500 to be on the road to Silverton for the Iron Horse event. That's both Citizens Tour and racers combined. So 2,500 total riders. So that limit is set in 2007. Now, we had never sold 2,500 registrations to Silverton to that point. The most we had ever sold to that point was about 1,980. We put that 2,500 limit on it, and we sold that many almost immediately in 2007. I don't think we would have done that had we not put the limit on it, but that's what it did. But it was also coinciding with this resurgence of road biking and people using it as the new golf, if you will, and folks were more health-minded and wanted to ride their bike. It's a low-impact sport on your joints. lots of different things. So that was a big transition in the early 2000s. The other thing that happened, so Ned Overend is very much synonymous with being the Iron Horse. And a lot of times people think Ned Overend is the winningest Iron Horse rider from a professional standpoint. Much as it hurts Ned's feelings when I tell him this, he is not the winningest rider at the professional level at the Iron Horse. There's a young lady that was from Boulder, Colorado, named Mara Abbott. So Mara Abbott enters the frame in the early 2000s, and she's a very young U23 rider. Mara goes on to win 6 Iron Horses from mid 2000s into the early, like 2013, 2014 timeframe, 2015. Mara was an elite level cyclist, won the women's tour of Italy, so on and so forth. But she becomes a very much a strong part of our event for many years there. She was extremely talented. She raced on an international stage. She was a big supporter of our event, so we were happy to have her. But I often get asked who's won the most Iron Horse Bicycle Classics, and Mara Abbott, who's now retired from Boulder, won 6 of them. And she didn't win them by a little bit. She won them commandingly, and she generally caught most of the men that started in front of her by a couple minutes, pro men, by the time she got to Silverton. So Mara was a great supporter of the event, and she is the winningest rider. Other things going on. So we've talked about the cycling culture in Durango. Iron Horse is our obviously our big weekend of the year, but cycling is growing in our community without a doubt. Mountain biking is still strong here locally from a ridership standpoint, and there's a real youth movement going on. So you've got FLC Cycling that has their program that's starting to enter into being 6 or 8 years old at this point, and very successful. So it's drawing these college kids here that want to ride their bikes, not just mountain bikes, but road bikes as well. And also what you're seeing is kids that are younger wanting to get out and ride with mom and dad and so on and so forth. There's a big interest from junior level cyclists. I'm talking grade school kids, grade school through high school. And there's a couple of local folks that are living here, Chad Cheney and Sarah Tesher, who kind of recognize the need for maybe a more formalized cycling program for kids. And so what takes place is they first start at Miller Middle School as a little after school program. And then as we get into 2006, they formalize it and it becomes Durango Devo, a youth cycling program here in Durango. So I happen to be one of the original board members for that program back in that 06 timeframe. And I remember talking about what it was going to look like and how many kids could we attract. And it absolutely, when it started, it took off. And so it went from having, 30, 40, 50 kids the first year to, I think currently there's 800 kids enrolled in the various Devo programs over the course of a year. And that's in a town of 18 to 20,000. So the Durango youth movement explodes. The other part of that Durango youth movement is that a lot of those kids back in 06, 07, or maybe even a little before that, are now competing on the world stage. So we have Sepp Kuss racing in the Tour de France. We have Quinn Simmons racing in the Tour de France. We have Howard Grotz, who came through that program that raced at the Olympics for Team USA in 2016. We have Carmen Small, who grew up here in Durango and wasn't necessarily part of the Durango youth movement. She was kind of before that, but she was part of the skiing movement. She goes on to be one of the top female racers in the country. Right now, I was just looking at results from a U23 race in Nova Mesto, World Cup mountain biking. We had several young ladies from Durango that were placing today across the pond. All of these kids had some level of this Durango youth movement that took place in the early 2000s and into mid 2000s. And then a lot of those riders have now moved on, and they are now competing on a world stage. Durango has more cycling Olympians per capita than anywhere else in the world. And so we have a very strong cycling community here. And a lot of it is driven out of that Durango Devo youth program that kind of built off of what Fort Lewis College had done. So a lot of Durango Devo's design was very similar to what they were doing with the college kids, from how to take kids out and ride and get them involved in racing and so on and so forth. So to have those two programs in our community is a fantastic thing. From an Iron Horse involvement in Durango Devo, we really tried to help them in the early years financially to get them up and going. And so, because like all great nonprofits, you always need money. And so we were able to help them out in the early years, get them started, and are happy to have that as something that we could contribute And that takes me on to my next topic. As the event grew and generated more revenue, we really tried to utilize some of that revenue to help support other community needs beyond cycling. And we still do that to this day. So things that we were doing as we moved into the year 2000, we became the kickoff event for the breast cancer center out at Mercy Hospital. And I think we contributed $400,000 to $500,000 to that, but helped them raise more money through some of the metrics they use to do different events off the Iron Horse to provide funding for that. Same for the hospice house. We've done things for the heart center. Ed Zink had a heart attack earlier on in his career of running the Iron Horse. He became very passionate about raising money for better diagnostic care for heart issues in our community. So we've worked on programs in Silverton and contributed money. If you've ridden the chairlift at Kendall Mountain, we helped contribute to getting that up and going back in the 90s. And so the Iron Horse has always tried to take a significant amount of revenue, or what's left over after we pay the bills, to help out community things beyond cycling. We do plenty of cycling stuff, but we also try to give money in and about the community. And we really bolstered that in the 2000s as the event continued to grow and have more visibility. And so as we get into the 2007, 2008, 2010, we're selling out the event in record time every year, 2,500 riders to Silverton. The economy's really boosted up from it on that weekend because these folks are bringing family members, and there's a lot of stuff going on. So it indeed is a multi-million-dollar revenue generator for the weekend. And so we are happy that it is doing what the hopes were way back in the early 70s, and that is, it is good for the economy. Okay, moving into the 2010s, we're almost done with all this stuff. Thanks for bearing with me. So as we enter into the 2010s, the thing has gotten so big that it sometimes feels like a spectacle. And at this point, I am the director of the event. And so I look at a lot of the things on this list, and, we really were trying new and different things. So the event, we'd done our 40th anniversary, or we're about to go through our 40th anniversary. The event's popular. We're trying to keep it fresh, but we're also trying to make sure we're doing the right thing with the Ride to Silverton, which is our bread and butter. But things we start trying are events like the quarter horse. So not everyone can ride to Silverton, but how do we make them part of the weekend? So Purgatory comes to us with the idea of the quarter horse, and we implement the quarter horse. Total success to this day. It gets another 300 people out there, and they get to ride to Silverton. They get to ride to Purgatory versus Silverton, but they feel part of the event. It's a good challenge for them. It's a bucket list item. The other thing that happens is we get a whole lot of media in the early 2010s. So we're featured in American Airways magazine. We're in the Life list on Outside magazine. The event gets featured on CNN. So we have a lot of great media going on that's bringing the rank and file folks to come to Durango and take part of the Iron Horse on that weekend. So again, it allows us to cast a bigger net, and the continued growth of the event happens. Maybe not necessarily with the 2,500 going to Silverton, but our mountain bike race gets reintroduced and it grows big again. We've introduced the quarter horse. The kids races, 400 kids. We're doing this crazy bike parade every year that's attracting 300 people to ride around in costumes. So now all at once we have 4,000 people participating over the course of the weekend. That's a big event. And so, when we bring the mountain bike race back, we decide that maybe it'd be fun to ride through Steamworks Brewing, because that had been done in 2001 when Durango hosted a mountain bike World Cup. As an exhibition, they raced through Steamworks. So when we were getting around the 40th anniversary, I suggested maybe we reintroduce that as a real event, and we started racing through the bar at Steamworks. I had no idea how popular that was going to be, or what a scene that was going to be, but it really turned into being, we're in the social media era now and YouTube. So that becomes the most popular thing on YouTube and on social media around the Iron Horse is the mountain bike race going through Steamworks. That's good. Altogether, what's also going on at that time is, going into the 2000s, we were probably the fourth oldest cycling event in the United States. So it was Tour of Somerville. It was the Nevada City Classic. It was the La Vuelta Bisbee, and it was the Iron Horse Bicycle Classic, had kind of been around the longest. Well, The Nevada City Classic falls to the wayside because their organizing committee kind of runs out of steam. Same with the Vuelta de Bisbee, they shut down. And so we're still standing. And so we've gone from being fourth to second. Tour of Somerville still exists in New Jersey and does very, very well. It's a one-day event, considerably smaller than ours, but nonetheless, they've been doing it since the World War II period. So we got a ways to go if we're going to catch up with them. So nonetheless, we're still standing and proud of it, and we're continuing to reinvest in the event, reinvest in the community, not just cycling, but other things. Then so one of our board members has a fantastic idea that it is Memorial Day, and we should recognize what that weekend is all about. So we have this train that races the bikes to Silverton, and that train's not at all full because we do return transportation. So some of those trains are going up there and they're going to bring riders back. Well, how about we recognize our veteran groups and so on and so forth. So we start the veterans train and we take approximately 100 veterans and families up to Silverton. We have a ceremony in the park, recognizing that Memorial Day weekend's not about the Iron Horse, but it is about a lot of things in our country. So we kick off that event, so that we're happy to have that added to our menu, once again, casting a big net. The other thing that starts taking place as we move through this period of time back to the youth cycling is this thing called NICA, or the National Interscholastic Cycling Association, forms. High school kids racing bicycles is what that comes down to. It has exploded. But obviously Durango kids take part in that. It is a big deal. State of Colorado forms a league. In no time, there's 1,800 kids competing in the the Colorado Cycling League, and we get the opportunity to host that here in Durango. So the Iron Horse organization goes on a real campaign back in 2017 to bring that to Durango. We feel like the state championship should be here. We secure that, and we're able to run that at Durango Mesa Park, which we'll talk about in a minute. And at the late part of the 2018, 2019 timeframe, we are planning for the 50th anniversary because we knew we needed to do a lot. And so preparation begins. And then unfortunately, what happens in 2019 is Ed Zink passes away from a heart attack in 2019. And I think it puts us all back a ways. Little did we know we were about to enter COVID and so on and so forth. But Ed was extremely passionate about the 50th Iron Horse. He was always our biggest leader, supporter, cheerleader. He did all of that stuff. So the loss of Ed right before the 50th anniversary, as we were in the planning stages, was a blow to the organization. And so we all kind of had to roll up our sleeves and get prepared because we wanted to recognize the 50th appropriately for not just the cyclists, but for all the years the community had supported it and all the different sponsors and so on and so forth. So we reset, we got ready, and then all at once we roll into 2020 and we have another big change. So we sell our registrations going into the 2020 event in December of 2019, and we start preparing and we got everything underway like we always do. It's a year-round process to get ready for the event. And all at once, the pandemic happens. And so we have to cancel the event entirely. And that was tough. So we had to cancel for snow in the past, but that was kind of the day of and so on and so forth. We never had to cancel, a month ahead of time. That was a big blow. And so we had to kind of navigate our way through that. We did as best we could. So there was no 2020 Iron Horse, which means that then the next year had to be the 49th, not that year, but the next. So that pushed out the 50th a year. So we kind of had to go into that whole space. But the other thing we decided at that point we needed to do is there was a lot of virtual cycling started. So Zwift and a lot of other applications where you could ride your bike online on a course. So we developed an Iron Horse course and had that set up, and we started doing virtual Iron Horse events that year. And that continues to run to this day. So we kind of adapted like we've always adapted with what's popular: mountain bikes, road bikes, kids racing, high school racing, whatever it may be. We decided we better go virtual. So we now have a virtual platform that is utilized. So that was good. And then we finally get through the 49th Iron Horse, which is in 2021, and we have a very scaled back version because of the pandemic, but we're able to do it. So we go to Silverton and we have a mountain bike race. So that was a success. And we have the quarter horse. And then we start planning for the 50th anniversary, which was last year, and it turned out well. And we'd had a host of events. We had some from the past, some in the future, and we hopefully did a good job of recognizing the community. We involved Ouray last year with the Ouray to Silverton ride, and the 50th anniversary was a great year. We captured a lot of the history and we've archived it, and so we're, the event's as strong as it's ever been, I would say. So in wrapping up, a couple of things that I think have kept this event going all these years aren't necessarily the professional riders or Ed Zink or myself or anyone else that's been involved, but I think it's been by and large the supportive community at the large scale. So we sometimes joke that we will thank everybody for coming and we thank everybody for putting up with it. And we realize it's an inconvenience to our community over Memorial Day weekend, and it creates traffic and there's bikes on the road and this, that, and the other. But by and large, the community, whether you like the Iron Horse or not, has supported it. Law enforcement, EMS, all of the volunteers, all of the different things, they're what make the Iron Horse tick. The community makes the Iron Horse tick. And so that is why we're still here 50 years later. We joked a lot last year with Tom Mayer that when he and the rest of them lined up in 1972, they probably didn't dream it was going to turn into this. And they certainly don't. They look at what it's done on the stage and they're impressed and happy that their early on vision has become such a success. But really, that is about the community. It's about the people that support it. It's about the folks that drive here to participate in it. It's all of those things that have kept it alive. It's not any one person, any one rider, any one thing. It's the combination of all of them. The other thing that makes the event unique, and I think will keep it going forever, or ever is a big statement, for maybe 50 more years, we have a steam engine train, we have incredible mountain passes and scenery, and we have a great mining town to finish in. You just can't do that everywhere. How many places have a steam engine train that you can race your bicycle against? So I think from having the right ingredients, those ingredients are critical to this thing for the long haul. We need to keep that road closed. We covet that. We appreciate that. And we need to have that, because without it, this Memorial Day tradition would go away. Looking forward, we are, having events in town. Durango has gotten tougher because there's more traffic and so on and so forth. And so the ride to Durango to Silverton's, it's that element, but there's also these other ancillary events we like to do, mountain bike racing or criterium racing. As we continue to develop Durango Mesa Park, we plan on building cycling stadium up there. That was Ed Zink's dream, and we are fortunate that the Katz family bought that property and is allowing our community to develop a bike park up there, and it'll have a frisbee golf and a dog park and camping and all these different things, along with a music venue and hopefully the fairgrounds. But having a venue to do large-scale cycling will be great. To have big races will be great. And to add to keeping this cycling thing going on here in Durango in the future. Additionally, we have a strong group of younger folks that are taking up the reins on some of these big community-led efforts. Ian Burnett has taken over the Iron Horse. We have a young man named Levi Kurlander that is running the Durango Devo program. We got a host of other young folks that are becoming advocates for these events, community members, community supporters that will hopefully carry this forward as it's been done over the last 50 years. And lastly, I think the thing that keeps this thing on the map and going is that we are certainly tied to what's been done in the past and believe in the history of the event and keeping those things around. But we are completely ready to adapt the event for the future. There's e-bikes on the course now. We have virtual Iron Horse. We have no idea what it's going to look like in 20 years, but I do know this, that the organization Iron Horse is committed to being with the times, if you will, and trying to understand what's popular. Gravel bikes have all once become popular. We are part of that, right? And so just continuing to look at ways to keep the event viable so it's something our community can be proud of, and keep doing all the things that the founding fathers really hoped it would be when they started it. So, okay, there you have it.
That was wonderful. What a great trip back through memory lane with lots of names and figures and feedbacks, and that was great. Thank you so much, Gaige. That was wonderful. Anybody have any questions? feel free to type them in the Q&A or raise your hand, and we'll let you unmute and ask your questions. Oh, Gaige gets a sip of water. That was amazing. We've got a question here. Okay. Okay, John, you can unmute and go.
My question is about Ewing Mesa. When will that be open to the public for mountain and gravel biking?
Thanks for the question. So we are I was standing up there yesterday. There is equipment running yesterday. So we are building what we're calling some demonstration trails that are on the shoulder of Horse Gulch leading up onto Durango Mesa Park. There's 7 miles of new trails going in there that'll also be e-bike friendly, that will be ready to go by the end of this summer. That will include a new trailhead at Horse Gulch that leads to Durango Mesa and a hub facility at the top. So that will be rideable for you on your bikes, John. I'm hoping by late August, September. And then the bike park proper, which is an 80-acre parcel up there that we're building cycling stadium in, if you will. And we are in the master planning components of that right now. And we hope to have the master plan for that facility that will include BMX and pump tracks and strider areas for little kids and, dog park, frisbee golf. We hope to get construction started on that in 2024 once this master plan is done, and have it operable, parts of it operable at the end of 24 into 25, and continue to build it out with the hopes that we're holding, national caliber or international caliber events up there in the 26, 27 timeframe.
And gravel biking?
Absolutely. So there will be, we're a lot of the trails that are being built up there are going to be suitable for gravel bikes. So maybe not as rough a terrain as your standard mountain bike trail. Additionally, we are improving service roads that lead to Horse Gulch from Durango Mesa Park that will make it more suitable for gravel bikes. And we're talking about doing a perimeter trail all the way around the mesa. For those of you who don't know, Durango Mesa makes up about 1,800 acres. And we want to put a perimeter trail in that loops you all the way around the mesa that would be many miles long as part of that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else? Okay, let me do some quick shameless self-promotion. In the meantime, you can type in whatever you want and we'll get questions answered. Gaige mentioned that poster with the picture of the Durango Cycling Club out at Old Baker's Bridge. If you want one of those, we got them here at the museum. They're $5, including tax. And we're open on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday from 10 a.m. till 4 p.m. and Wednesday and Friday from 1 p.m. until 4 p.m. There's no charge for admission. So even if you just have a few minutes or you want to come grab one of those posters, come on in and we'd love to see you. The other thing, if you haven't heard, this last summer, we did an oral history with Dolph Koos. And oh my gosh, they're just all the names and the amazing history with the skiing and all the programs that he did came out of that. We have 3 hours and 45 minutes of video. So what we've done is, as we're working on a video that is not as long as Gone with the Wind, we released a series of podcasts in February that are on our website, animusmuseum.org, that you can download and listen to in smaller bites. Next week, our annual publication, History La Plata, will be inserted in the Durango Herald's weekend edition. So we're really excited about that. You'll be able to pick up a copy at the museum, the Welcome Center, and the Railroad Museum if you don't get it delivered in the paper, and it'll be online. Then the next weekend, of course, is the various events of the Iron Horse Classic. So you come out and cheer on the riders, and the race against the train is Saturday the 27th. And there are things obviously going on all weekend. In June, our second Saturday series webinar, hard to say, will be a little different. We will have John Steinley, who will be joining us on Zoom. He's going to be talking about his latest book, Colorado and the Civil War. He was here a couple years ago to do a book talk about his book on this Colorado and the Silver Crash. And then last year, he portrayed Senator Henry Teller doing a whistle stop tour down at the depot, which was really exciting. And that video is on our website if you missed that one too. So we're going to do that next month. All the details, and you can register on our website, animusmuseum.org, under events. Anything else? Any last minute questions? We'll wrap it up. To keep up with us here at the Animus Museum, and we're so glad that Gaige was able to join us today and that we got this recorded, and this history will be on our again on our website, and we've got it down for posterity. And we also want to thank the Iron Horse for being a sponsor of the museum and the Historical Society. Join us. Members only get access to our online catalog database, where we have thousands of photos and pictures of archives that you can peruse from the comfort of your own home. Visit our website for more resources, subscribe to our e-blasts, follow us on Facebook, like us on Instagram, and if you want to see continued programming like this, be sure to hit the donate button on our website. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Gaige. We appreciate all your support, and have a great weekend. Thanks, everybody.